What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Sound Design with Callen. In this week's episode, I'll be showing you how I made this bass right here. All right, let's go. All right, so first things first, we're going to go ahead and open up oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. Oscillator 1, we're going to go ahead and turn into a sine wave. Oscillator 2 is going to stay at a saw wave. You can find these both in the basic shapes folder within Vital. The next step we're going to want to do is bring this up 24 semitones, basically 2 octaves. We're going to leave oscillator 1 at 0. The next thing we're going to want to do is turn oscillator 2 up to 24 semitones. It'll be 2 octaves, and we're going to leave oscillator 1 at 0. Next, we're going to turn oscillator 1's unison up to 10 voices, bring the percentage down to 0. We're also going to want to bring the phase down to 0. Next step, we're going to bring oscillator 1's level down to about 0.70. That's close enough. And oscillator 2's level down to 0. The reason for that is we're going to go ahead and FM oscillator 1 to oscillator 2. We can go ahead and bring this down to 0 for right now, but we're going to adjust this later. Next, we're going to want to go ahead and turn our spectral morph knob on, and we want to switch this to inharmonic stretch. Okay. Oscillator 2, we're going to turn the unison up to 4 voices. Bring this down to 0%. I'm going to make this one smear. Go ahead and bring this down to about 35.37%. Our wave morph knob, we're going to go ahead and turn this onto sync mode, and we're just going to go ahead and leave the sync at 50%. All right, the next step is we're going to want to go ahead and open up the noise oscillator. We're going to leave this on white noise, but we're going to bring our level down to about 0.12%. Make sure that we change this from effects to filter 1, and that's about all we're going to do with the oscillators from now. Now we're going to go ahead and jump down into the filters. Filter 1, we're going to go ahead and leave on analog 12, but we're going to turn this into a bandpass. From here, we're going to bring the cutoff down to about -27. Make sure that we turn on oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 so that this filter is affecting both oscillator 1, oscillator 2, as well as our noise oscillator. Next, we want to go ahead and turn on filter 2. We're going to open up the filter type and go to comb and switch it to low, high, flange, plus. From here, we're going to go ahead and adjust the knob just a little bit to 0.167. And we're going to bring our resonance down to about 33. We're also going to bring up filter 1's resonance to about 62.17. So what this button does is affect the signal flow from filter 1, which is a bandpass, which is then going into filter 2 and being affected by the flange filter. Don't forget to bring the cutoff down to about -15.89 on filter 2. Now that we're done with the oscillators and filters, we can go ahead and move over to the LFO tabs. Let's go ahead and start with LFO 1. LFO 1, we're going to go ahead and draw a shape that sort of looks something like this. Something like that. And in LFO 2, we're going to go ahead and draw a shape that looks something like this. Now that our oscillators and LFOs are set up, we can go ahead and go over to the effects tab. We're going to come back in just a few moments and start assigning the LFOs to different parameters, but for now, we're going to go ahead and do this. So the first thing that we're going to want to adjust within our chorus tab is the voices. We don't need this many voices, so we're going to go ahead and bring this down to 4 from 16. Don't worry about adjusting the depth of the delay knobs, but we are going to adjust the mix and the spread. Our mix knob, we're going to go ahead and bring down to 14.63, or at least something close to that. That's good enough. And our spread knob, we're going to go ahead and bring down to 0.482. The next effect we want to add is delay. From here, we're going to change our mode from mono to stereo. And we're going to bring this from 8th notes up to 1/64th on each of these. We're going to go ahead and leave the feedback and cutoff where they're at, but we do want to adjust the mix and the spread. The mix, we're going to go ahead and bring down to 23.76. And our spread is going to be 0.695. And what we're doing in this tab is adding a bit of a tonal delay effect that we're going to hear in the finished product. Next, we're going to turn on our compressor. When we open up the compressor, it should be set to multiband mode automatically. You don't need to mess with the mix or any of these bands. However, we are going to adjust the attack and release. First, we're going to bring our attack from 50% up to around 91.55. Our release, we're going to bring down to around 10.69. Next thing we're going to want to do is turn on our equalizer. So right off the bat, I want to go ahead and select the band button as well as the high button. But before we dive into those, I want to go ahead and adjust the low shelf. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the gain down a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring this down around -3. Next, we're going to switch over to the band filter. We're going to bring this up to around 121.7. Bring the resonance down to 0. And finally, we're going to switch to the high tab. Switch the cutoff to around 84.86. And bring the resonance down to around 6.47. Your EQ is going to look a little bit silly, but we are going to be coming back in just a few minutes with the LFOs and affecting these parameters. The next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and open up our other filter. For our filter type, we're going to go ahead and switch this from analog 12 to phaser positive. We're going to go ahead and bring our drive up to around 13.15. Go ahead and leave the mix and key track just where they're at. However, we are going to move our blend knob to around 1.57. And we're going to move our cutoff to around 12.12. Again, we're also going to be adjusting these parameters with the LFOs in just a few minutes. The next effect in the signal flow that we're going to add is our distortion. From here, we're going to bring our drive down about minus 13 dB. Go ahead and leave the mix at 100. Next, we're going to go ahead and turn on the filter type and switch this from none to pre. From here, go ahead and bring the cutoff down to around 39.6. Bring your resonance down to around 41.55. And go ahead and leave the blend at 0. The next thing that we're going to want to add is a flanger. Inside the flanger, you'll notice that the filter is moving a bit. We don't want that. What we're going to go ahead and do is bring this from 4 down to freeze. And you're going to notice that it stops moving. Show it again. And off. This is what we want. We don't want the filter moving. Let's go ahead and bring our offset down to around 12.16. Bring our feedback to around 39.4. Bring the mix down to 0. Bring the center down to about 46. And last but not least, the depth can stay at 50%. Last but not least, the final thing that we're going to add in the effects tab is our reverb. Inside the reverb tab, we're not going to really touch the low cut or the high cut knobs. However, we are going to adjust some of these parameters. The first one I want to adjust is our cutoff. We're going to go ahead and bring that up to 15.44. Bring our gain all the way down to around -5. And lastly, our mix down to around 6.94. Now that we have everything set up in our voice tab and our effects tab, we can go ahead and start messing with the LFO1s and assigning them to different parameters. This is going to really bring the sound to life. Right now, it's not going to sound like anything special. All you can really hear is a sub bass. All right, so the first thing we're going to do with LFO1 is bring this over to our level. Set this to about 0.349. We're also going to want to bring it down to our noise level and bring this down to around -0.106. Next, we're going to use LFO1 to adjust the cutoff of the bandpass, and we're going to set this to around 44.42. We also want to use this to adjust the cutoff of filter 2. Let's go ahead and bring this down to 33.57. Let's go ahead and drag this to the drive of LFO1 as well. We're going to bring this to 5.381 or somewhere close to there. That's good enough. Next, we're going to hop back into the effects tab, and we're going to use LFO1 to adjust each of these parameters that we set earlier. Let's go ahead and start with the low button. We're going to drag LFO1 to the cutoff, set this to around 47.21, switch to our band tab, bring this down to around -39.12. Lastly, we're going to adjust the high tab and bring this to around 57.61. You'll start to notice the EQ doing some work already. Next, we're going to use LFO1 to adjust the drive as well as our cutoff. Let's go ahead and bring the drive knob down to around 31.88 and our cutoff down to around 82.66. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Now that we have all the parameters set up for LFO1, let's go ahead and jump into LFO2. With LFO2, we're mainly going to be affecting the spectral morph knob as well as the wave morph knob on both oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. Let's go ahead and start with the FM. We're going to drag LFO2 up to FM on oscillator 1. Bring this to around 0.132. And already you can hear a major difference in the sound as soon as we turn on our FM and start modulating oscillator 2. Next, we're going to drag LFO2 to our enharmonic knob. Bring this down to around 0.368. Next, we're going to use LFO2 to adjust the smear on oscillator 2. Let's go ahead and bring this down to 0.223. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and open up the advanced tab. From here, this is going to control both oscillator 1 and oscillator 2's unison. You can modulate these knobs right here to get some really crazy effects. Before we assign LFO2 to any of these knobs, let's go ahead and just adjust these a little bit. Let's go ahead and change the spec spread to around 26.11 and the distortion spread to around 29.27. On oscillator 2, we'll bring the distortion spread down to around -9.7 and the spec spread down to around -1.125. You're barely going to move the knob. And what these knobs do is spread voices through different wavetable positions. So the distortion spread knob is going to be for the right knob on each oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. And the spectral spread is going to be for the spectral morph knob, which is the left knob on both oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. For the sake of time, I'm not going to really dive into that too much because it could take a very long time. Just know that these knobs are essentially affecting these two knobs right here. You can get some really, really cool effects by modulating these, which is what we're about to do right now. All we're going to do is go ahead and drag LFO2 to the distortion spread. We're going to go ahead and right-click this, make this bipolar. What the bipolar button does is it makes the effect go from left to right, affecting both directions as opposed to unipolar, which is just going to go one direction. So we're going to go ahead and set this to 0.179. Lastly, for LFO2, we're going to go ahead and bring this over to the other filter, and we're going to adjust the cutoff. We're also going to set this to bipolar mode and bring it down to -27. Now that we're getting towards the end of the sound, we can actually start adding some macros. So from here, we're going to go ahead and drag macro 1 down to the reverb mix amount. I'm going to go ahead and title this reverb. We're going to go ahead and just bring this up to 0.53, just a tiny, tiny bit. Now from here, we can go ahead and use this knob to control the amount of reverb that we want on the overall sound. The last thing I want to do within the reverb tab is just adjust this EQ so we can make the sound a little bit more clean. We're going to adjust the cutoff to around 101.1. We're going to go ahead and bring the gain down to around -5. It should look something like this. And what this is doing is just cleaning up some of the highs in the final sound. Without it, you're going to notice a major difference. So if we bring this back up, it's a little bit messy, but as soon as we bring it back down, it's going to sound much more clean. Now that we have the final sound within Vital, all that we're going to do is just add some OTT, some dispersers, another OTT, and a saturator. This is just going to beef up the sound a little bit. This disperser rack I just made a while back. Essentially, it's just 3 different dispersers, all set at the same parameters. And I went ahead and grouped it and just set some macros to the amount, the pitch, and the frequency. So if you guys want to go ahead and copy this, you're more than welcome to. It's nothing crazy. But essentially, it's just an OTT with the output cranked up to around 16.2, the time at 389%, and the amount at 18. For that, we go ahead and use the disperser rack. Another OTT with the same exact parameters, so you can just go ahead and duplicate this right after it. Lastly, just a saturator to bring it up around 4 dB. Without the processing, you'll notice a pretty big difference. It's not quite as beefy, but with it. And that's it. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in this week. If you found this video useful, don't forget to follow me for more content.